let me encourage you that just because architecture is complex to look at doesn't necessarily mean it's complex to draw. Let me show you with this facade of the Museum of Natural History in Vienna how to see, in inverted commas, complex architecture as a more simple structure, and then to draw that simpler structure. And let me explain what to look for and where to focus our attention as we draw it. Now, I'm drawing this with a 0.1 millimeter pen, and it took me just under an hour in real time to draw. And we're looking at this architecture part of the drawing at 3 times my drawing speed, and we'll speed up faster than that just to finish off the drawing with the large trees in front and the hedge down the bottom and the figures and a bit of shading, hatching on the right-hand side of the building. But we're looking at this architecture at a slower rate than the rest of the drawing will be, so that we can focus on seeing the simpler shapes. And what we need to see is the perspective angles, whether they're the perimeter angles or whether they're angles of things that line up on a horizontal plane on the facade. We need to identify what those angles are, and we need to work really hard at capturing those angles accurately, because they're a really crucial part of what we're drawing. The other thing we need to see is the foreshortening. We need to get a sense of how quickly the building visually narrows or compresses as it moves away from us, in this case, as it moves from right to left. Once we see that, then we need to identify what I think of as the bones visually, the bones of the building. And in this case, it's going to be primarily these pilasters, these squared off columns joined to the front of the facade, as well as the 3-dimensional, completely round columns that sit forward of the facade in the centre. They're the key elements. If I space those correctly, taking in mind the foreshortening, the fact that they're going to seem to move closer together as they move further away from us, if I focus on those as I draw, then that lets me then fill in the detail, because the detail is just window dressing. And if I get the bones in the right place, it's easy to put the details in. Or we could think of it in terms of, if the bones are coat hangers, if we space the coat hangers equally, then it's quite straightforward just to hang the clothes on the hangers. They're going to be in the right place, is what I'm saying. And so that's what I'm doing here. I could have drawn this a different way, I suppose. I could have just drawn the bones first, going all the way down, and then added the details all at once. It's just not the way I'm used to drawing, but it would have worked just as well. And sometimes I feel it is actually easier to get a feel for what's happening if we add at least some of the details as we go. But we have to be focusing on getting the bones correct, getting the angles accurate, understanding how much foreshortening is happening, and visually what effect that has on the placement of the bones, and also get a sense of what smaller elements, such as these windows along the top, these square windows, that they line up and therefore they create their own perspective angle. And with this particular drawing, the most complicated thing is the fact that these fully rounded columns sit forward of the building, and therefore above them, the cornice comes out over the entablature that sits on top of those columns. And so that complicates things just a little bit. But I didn't say there would be no complexity in the drawing, simply that if we see it the right way, we can be less intimidated by the overall complexity of the drawing. But we really have to focus on getting these bones, the fundamental elements, the angles, the foreshortening, and the major elements that visually are easiest to see, and then position those correctly. Then the decoration, we can just pop that on wherever it goes. And we already have the angles and the spaces. So the decoration becomes not such a problem. And in a building such as this, even though there's a lot of ornate carving on it, from the distance we're looking at it from and from the size of the drawing we're doing, we can't draw it. This is a wonderful example of drawing the effect of detail applied to architecture. We really just want to have a few squiggles, a few indications of decorative elements that perhaps are a little more stated closer to us, which means towards the right-hand side of the building, and are less stated down the left-hand side. Now, you can see here, for all the people who always enjoy it, particularly when I don't get something quite right, I have slid my building just down a bit too much. So I could have foreshortened it just a little bit more tightly. The whole building is probably going to be 10 millimeters at most. Maybe it's more like 7 or 8, too long. But I've also, I think, drawn it slightly too large overall. So that's going to mean that proportionally it's okay. It's just not quite the same scale as the reference. And of course, normally anyone seeing our drawing isn't going to be seeing our photo to compare it to. But you can see here now where for this furthest part, I've really just drawn the bones first, and now I'm just hanging the detail onto the bones. And because we're way down the end and it's the furthest part, drawing the effect of the detail means just a few hints, a few indications, even more lightly than that detail's being done up the other end. We don't want any part of the detail to stand out. It's not an architectural study of the decorations, it's a visual grab of the overall view. And so it's the overall impressiveness that we want to capture. But the main thing that we still see when we look at our reference or look at the building in life is the perspective angles, the architectural elements that line up, and the bones, because they are visually dominant. Those flat pilasters do draw the eye because they're plain amidst a fair bit of decoration. So we want to get those, we want to get the angles correct. So that's where our focus should be. Our focus should be not looking at, trying to draw, or worrying about the detail. Now you'll notice I also established where these trees were going to be. And it's important that we try and recognize where the individual trees are in places such as this, that we're not just drawing one continuous band of foliage, because that will also create a more two-dimensional effect. We want a sense of distance. We want a sense of this building sloping away. And by controlling the detail that we draw, we can help create that visual impression. But we can do it with the trees as well, possibly even more easily. So we've turned the corner here, and this section here that goes off to the right, which is shaded from the late afternoon sun from memory, I'm really going to draw with a lot less detail. Again, because without the direct sun casting very strong shadows, albeit just on thin edges of the front, we don't see the detail down this side nearly as well. We really have to work hard to see the detail. So again, I want to try and capture that effect, the relative difference between how we see the details on the front and how we see the details on that shaded side. And look, if you're finding this interesting, helpful, encouraging, then please just hit the like button for me, and that will help me out as well. And so now we have these statues on top, as well as the balustrades. Now all of these, or both of these, the balustrades and the pilasters, are where I'm going to again try and draw the effective detail. I don't, particularly with the balustrade, don't want to get too complex. I want to just give a sense of what's happening, and that often means trying to capture any shadows that help to define what's happening, because it's often the shadows that we notice, and so we don't need to draw all the detail exactly, because the brain will see the shadows and go, oh, I know what that is, and create in our imagination all this detail that we haven't actually drawn. And so now just do the same around the side. And then we've got the statues. With the statues, it's important to notice that they line up on a perspective angle, that all of their heads are approximately at the same level on the horizontal, and therefore the heads will follow the angles that the rest of the perspective angles in the drawing are following. So a line down the top of all their heads will be a slightly steeper angle than the line of the top of the balustrade, and that will be a slightly steeper angle than the line at the top of the entablature, and that will be a steeper angle than the line, say, at the bottom of the square windows, and so forth. So it's keeping these perspective angles tight. These are the things, if we focus on these, our drawing will work. And as the figures move further down, they become smaller and they become thinner, and we try and draw them with less detail even, and with a lighter feel, because the ones that are further away visually have all those effects, and we want to recreate those effects with the marks that we create them with. I find the most important thing personally for me is to draw the heads much smaller than I think they need to be. I find that they're invariably pretty much the right size. When I tried to draw the heads the size I thought they should be, I found invariably they were way too big, and then I didn't have space to draw the body. Because the way to make sure that the tops of the heads all line up is to draw the heads first on the perspective angle that we want. So that's why the scale of the heads then needs to be in proportion to the body that will fit between the head and the base. And so we're just coming to the end of the 3 times normal drawing speed, and then we'll speed up really quickly and do the hatching for the trees and that hedge, and put the figures in and do a little bit of shadow right in the front to give a context and to strengthen, to emphasize the 3 dimensions of this scene. The thing I really like about the trees is that I feel like architecture never looks so architectural as when it's next to something that's very not architectural. And there's possibly not anything more unarchitectural than a tree, unless perhaps the tree's been trimmed into a very geometric shape. But I think in some ways these trees make the architecture look even more impressive, look even more complex, because of the contrast in form, in value, in shape, in edge, in pretty much every way. And so it's good to draw them in a way that emphasizes the difference. I think we're about 8 times normal drawing speed. So this will speed up really quick. So we're really at the end, just about. If you haven't hit the like button, please do. I'd love to hear your thoughts about my idea of seeing in a complex architectural form the simpler architecture that lies within it, and focusing on the perspective angles, the foreshortening, and then adding the detail after that, and drawing the effect of the detail, and particularly drawing things with a lighter touch as we move further away, which means we have to draw less and less, which makes it even less complex to do. Because our brain will see the more detail that we've drawn closer to us, and will then just presume that that's what works all the way down. So just a hint of what's at the side, just take it to the edge of the paper. I forgot to do the buildings on the other side. I did intend to. It wasn't deliberate that I left those out. It might look as though it does sort of emphasize the building more, but I think I still would have done them if I'd realised. And this hedge, some more value. Now you'll notice that the values in the shadows for the trees darken closer to us and become lighter, and less hatching involved in creating them as they move further away. And that's, again, to try and create the sense of distance. And then I think we're pretty much done. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. I hope you found this interesting and helpful. I hope you give it a go. The photo will be on my channel community page. Try and see the simplicity of this rather than the detail. But however it works, make sure you have fun. Bye.